Well, as Amy said, thank you guys for joining us today. It is so good to see newer staff coming on board to DD Councils. If you've been around for a week or so, you know you've joined the best network in the land. So we appreciate you wanting to give your professional service to the greater intellectual and developmental disability community. And we are a community nationally and in our territories. So we know that you guys do great work. I will preface this by saying councils have great flexibility in the way that work is conducted. So if you're one of those people who thinks that every council does everything exactly the same, you will be disappointed when you talk to a colleague because there are a number of ways. This law and this program is really built to offer states and territories the maximum flexibility for best fit. What is going on with your developmental disabilities community and how do you approach that? And not every approach works in every single area. So that is why you get maximum flexibility. There are requirements. And so we will talk about a few of those today. Amy, if you want to start the slide deck, we'll look at the topics we're going to talk about. My introduction is we all do a DD Council program, but we all probably approach it process-wise a little bit differently. We are going to just give you a little bit of foundation about the history and progression of councils and how the DD Act has progressed over the years. We are going to talk at not a lot, but we are going to kind of hit the high points on federal reporting because as new staff, we are quite sure you are totally immersed in something, either state plan development or reporting on last year or gearing up projects for when we get going for fiscal year 26. And then we do want to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the council, council members, and of course, US staff generally. And we at ITAC, we do approach this from very much rooted in what the law, the regulations and instructions say that councils need to do. And so, again, how your council approaches it is your decision. And your project officers at the federal level totally understand how you all are meeting the requirements. And so we don't dip and dive. We'll never tell you it's wrong unless there's like it's just unallowable or not supported. Then we're pretty quick to tell you, okay, we need to rethink. We won't tell you you're wrong, but you probably want to rethink. Okay, Amy. Let's see. Let's start off with the history and progression of why we're even here. So, back in the early 60s, under President Kennedy, he actually, even before 63, so we've just kind of given you these big dates here. But in 61, he established a national panel. And the older term, we'll call it intellectual disabilities, because the older term we used to use is rather offensive to our population today. And so this panel came together, and they really were at that time concerned with um, institutional facilities being underfunded, under resourced. There was systemic abuse and neglect. All of those issues bubbled up. And so, out of this initial panel in 61, there came a message that President Kennedy sent over to Congress in 63. And he's like, we need a legislative package with goals related to intellectual disabilities. And so Congress listened and they passed some of the recommendations. And so in 63, there was actually a maternal and child health and uh, intellectual disability planning amendments was what they were called. And so there was some intellectual disability facilities and a community mental health center construction act. And so within that larger law, not specifically focused on all DD, that came forward some funding to really address and expand services for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So then we come forward, we hang out there a few years. And in 67, Congress actually expanded services for people with intellectual disabilities and even put additional money. So in your state or territory, that kind of money actually went to your whatever agency in your state provided services to people with intellectual disabilities. And so if you're a council that's had the same DSA for 50 or 60 years, which my state is one of those, they actually got the money and they got to determine where that money went and how it was used for people with intellectual disabilities. So that becomes important as this law starts to be as we start getting real specific laws, because then the role of that state agency changed and it was diminished, and all of that authority came to the DD Council. So that's the really cool thing. But we all started out with those agencies getting that money. So in 1970, that was there was the Developmental Disability Services and Facilities Construction Act. And so that's when you start seeing the term developmental disabilities. So 70, okay? And within that particular piece of legislation, they added the term developmental disabilities and they expanded the term. It used to just be reflecting people with intellectual disabilities. But they expanded it in 70. And so that's when you would start seeing other disabilities referenced, like cerebral palsy, epilepsy, certain neurological conditions that began before age 18. And so, and then in 70, also, that particular law required every state to establish a state planning and advisory council responsible for submitting an annual plan. And so that's when you start seeing the emergence of, a DD council program. Now, in 70, that's also when your university program was established. Okay. So then we move on to 1975, and you'll see in all of these major years, these major key dates for the DD Act when they reauthorized or updated the law. Most of the time, they tinkered with the definition of developmental disability. So, always about some good advocacy. You got to know it was all about some advocacy. So, in 75, they added autism and dyslexia to the definition. Some people these days, with a lot of the since, oh, I don't know, we've got a lot of great advocates in the autism world. Autism is not new to developmental disabilities. It didn't emerge in 2010. It was actually part of the definition in 75. And also, what was important in 75 was that councils were required to prepare a plan on deinstitutionalization in their state. And so, when you think about these large institutional facilities, um, And that was, remember, one of the concerns with that panel that President Kennedy created back in 60, between 61 and 63. That was what they were concerned about. It was councils that were charged with determining how we were going to deinstitutionalize services for people and let people come back out. So you started seeing individualized plans that were required. You started there was a lot of language that supported individualization. This is also important year because the protection and advocacy program was created, and that is your PNA or your disability rights, whatever, if it's Maryland, if it's Idaho, if it's Alabama. So your protection and advocacy system was created. Probably not as an afterthought. That was very orchestrated. Councils were doing the plans on deinstitutionalization. Protection and advocacy system was created. Also, what was important for us, DD councils, we were no longer called advisory. Councils were charged, the governor was charged with appointing council members in 1975. And another big thing in 75, the role of the council to advocate was established. So 75, that was the year that we were absolutely, this is federal law. Your role is to advocate. That's not new, been around forever. So then we go to 78. Guess what they did? They revised the definition of developmental disability and they raised the onset age to age 22. So remember, it started off at 18. Now we're up to age 22. The other cool thing was that the membership criteria is established by federal law, and in 1978 is when they brought up the membership, and they used the term consumer representation, but it was people with developmental disabilities and family members of people with developmental disabilities or children and then immediate family members. That was raised to 50%. So it was half and half. So they could appoint 50% non citizen members, and the rest would be probably agency folks. So in 78, we got it up to 50%. And 81, you don't see it there, but there was a little package that went through in 81. If you're looking at the expanded version of this, you'll see it was just reauthorized with no amendments, minimal changes. Then we go to 84, and guess what we see? We see people first language used throughout the law. So this is really cool because if you follow the evolution of language and how we refer to people with developmental disabilities. And of course, it changes based on preferences. But people first language really emerged in our DD Act in 84. The values section of the law started to really get more things expressed. So you start seeing the emergence of independence, productivity, integration. That is when you first saw those words come through in our law. And believe it or not, back in the olden days, and I'm old enough to remember this was required, 84. Every single council in this country and territories were required to do employment related activities. And so today, you know that your required activities are self advocacy activities. Back in 84, every council worked on employment. And it really shifted the way, because then you start seeing things in 87 like capabilities, competencies, preferences, That is not a surprise. When we start focusing on employment, then you realize those things were missing from the law. So we wanted those values expressed. 87 also focused councils on systems change efforts. So that's when that whole thing emerged, when you start seeing systems change. Remember, advocacy was a role back in 1975. So now, about 12 years later, now we're going to pick up systems change. And also in 1987, you started seeing language to support the role of the DD Council in public policy advocacy and in educating policymakers. So that was 87. And so that is where we have that authority. We've always had the authority to advocate, but now they made it crystal clear we could also engage in public policy advocacy and educating policymakers. So none of this is new. I know that. 1990, the revisions in 90 just added the values of inclusion and interdependence to the law. Also, the DD definition got modified again, and in 90 they absolutely pulled out how the definition applies to children under the age of 5. Today, you see it as under the age of 8, but it started off under the age of 5. And then a lot of you might have a designated state agency that your council is assigned to or sits within. The responsibilities of the designated state agency were changed, and they were revised. So, kind of start seeing where we really need the agency not to be interfering with what the council's doing, strengthening the council's ability to conduct their own work, and that kind of stuff. Then in 94, there was a bunch of changes. So 94, I think, although we don't say it, I think it became, now I love the DD Act. I keep it. I have a hard copy on my desk at all times. It's my friend. You can't go wrong if you read the DD Act, but this particular version of the DD Act was reorganized and simplified. And that is why I think I love it so much, because I can actually read this federal law and understand most of it. And so it's written in a way. And so I think our law was on the cutting edge of plain language back in 94. Um, and they also started including in 94 was when you started adding an emphasis on cultural diversity and culturally competent services and supports. So that was in 94. I know it's hard to think. We were really cutting edge. If you look throughout the history of the DD Act, we really took up things quite early. And if you're in charge of educating your council members, I've got a great game you can play by year. When did this happen under the DD Act? And you will see most people have no idea that, cultural diversity emerged in 94. They always think, oh, that had to have been 2000 something. No, we've been doing this forever. Or people first language started when. So it's a fun way to help your council members understand why why we do the work we do. But going back to this, 94. There was a projects of national significance were added to the law. It's not part of the DD Council program, but it was a new title that was added. This 94 was when they took away the word planning when they referenced the DD Council. So back in the olden days, you all were all called the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. And there was a lot of folks who felt like that did not truly reflect what councils do. Yes, we create a plan, but that seemed to tell people all we do is sit around and plan when we were actually making mountains move. And so that is when you saw a change in the way councils were referred to. Um, let's see, what else? There was a new definition added to the law on personal attendant services. So that was great. And there was more clarification to the role of the designated state agency. Now, this is when the law specifically said that the agency has to enter into an agreement with the council if requested by the council. And that is to just further clarify roles so that the state agency knows what the council's going to be doing, and the council understands what the designated state agency is going to do with regard to operations. Then in 96, you don't see it there because nothing big happened. It simply reauthorized the law through 99. But then in 2000, 2000 is the last time our law has been reauthorized. So the big things in 2000, so back in the olden days, not that I expect you to remember, and there will not be a quiz later, but you remember, I think I said it was like you had to do a 1-year plan. At some point, you all were required to do 3-year plans. In 2000, it was moved to 5-year plans. So that is when you started seeing the 5-year plan requirement. Instead of priority areas, they established 9 areas of emphasis that are current today, and it is important, and we will talk about those because that is the way the federal government does organize some of your work by area of emphasis. There was a new definition for self-determination added in 2000, so that was great. And then there was a whole bunch of requirements. So it required councils to report on waiting lists. So for 25 years, you've been reporting on waiting lists in your state. It requires that standalone goal or objective on self advocacy. It requires now, with membership, the citizen side of the membership went up to 60%. And so that is really great. That means that people with developmental disabilities, family members, um, of, parents of children, and family members of adults who can't advocate for themselves actually have the majority vote on a council. And it also, interestingly enough, 2000 is when you got your Medicaid representative. They were not on the council prior to that, but in 2000 that was added. And then, of course, if you're counting any of the data for the council, you know that you have to report on consumer satisfaction. And that is what was required in 2000. Oh, okay. Massachusetts, no, wait, yes, does not make DD waiting list public. Any advice for states that don't make, yes, you report to the feds that your state does not make waiting list information public. However, do you have any kind of anecdotal? You can reflect not in the data columns of that report, but in there is an open field. Any other information like on your state plan development side, you can write your stuff in there. And you're probably, if you went to the national data sets on waiting list, you would be a DNR, did not report state. And so if you are a DNR state or did not, I think it's a DNR, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. You can't make up what's not there, but or if you're one of the states who think they're clever and they say, "Well, we don't have a waiting list. Everybody gets something." They'll send them a newsletter 3 times a year, something like that. You can actually write that in as well. You can say, "Yeah, but it's not total service." They call it very interesting things in some states. So we've got some content highlights. I have put a link in the chat to the full orientation. There's a lot more things that happen with regard to the progression of the DD Act. Why do you need to understand this? Because we really do need to understand how cool we really are, and that we have been on the cusp of really great things for decades. And do not discount yourself. When you wonder, why are we doing some of the things we do? You can look quickly at some history and go, oh, that's why we do that. Oh, that's why we are where we are. And we take our progression very seriously. Let's go to the next slide. What have we got? The 9 areas of emphasis. So, all of these are fully described in the DD Act definitions section of the law, which is the very first, almost the very first thing. Um, but there's 9, and most of them are pretty darn self explanatory. Like, I don't need to talk to you about childcare. You know what that is. You know what education and early intervention is, and most of the rest. Quality assurance, though, I do want to pull that one out because I think newer staff, as you're working through things, um, all of your efforts are categorized by area of emphasis. It's just an easy way to organize and do a collective view of where councils work. Because at the federal level, your federal people are pulling together information for policymakers, the Office of Management and Budget, Congress, and they want to be able to really kind of paint a picture for where council's efforts are being made. And using the areas of emphasis is one of those ways. But and of course, the DD Act always preferences each one of these with advocacy, capacity building, and systems change activities, because those are your big 3 buckets. You advocate, you build capacity, whether that's person by person, or if that's organization by organization, or if that is the state as a whole. You're building capacity in some way. And then systems change activities, which is a core responsibility. You're looking to see where things can be better for people with IDD. And so a lot of that is connected to services, supports, and other assistance. And a lot of times those are coordinated by larger entities that operate with rules, regulations, instructions that we can impact. But a note about quality assurance. So it starts off and you go, oh, that's not us. Monitoring of services, supports, and assistance in facilities. Well, you know that's not you. That is a protection and advocacy role. That is what they do. Um, but then we come down to training in leadership, self advocacy, and self determination, and that can include training on abuse, neglect, sexual and financial exploitation. A lot of councils worked on the seclusion and restraint issue several years ago and was very successful in making systems change happen and new policies in place around that. But when you see the term quality assurance, don't check out on that, because all of you do this one and you do it specifically through self advocacy. You do it in other ways too, but specifically self advocacy. And it also includes any kind of coordination you're doing with other agencies, any kind of systems integration work you're doing. So, So don't just skip over it and say, "Ooh, that means something." I think I know the definition of that because now you're in DD Council definition land, and that's what it means here. So it important for you to know, and we do try to remind you guys consistently about that. Okay, next. Of course, you've got some DD Act partners. Most of the time, we call them USEDS and PNAs. But honestly, the university centers are there's one or more in every U.S. state. Um, and there are some in the territories too. I don't know why it says this. This is an AUCD publication, graphic here. And then your protection and advocacy, most of them are called disability rights. And so so university centers, they do a lot of interdisciplinary pre-service preparation. They do most of the research, evaluations, disseminate information, and they do perform some community services and training, but they're really about doing some focus on professional development. And of course, your disability rights, they're all about giving legal representation to people with disabilities, ensuring equal access to life in the community. And they really do monitor and investigate conditions in facilities that provide services to people with disabilities. So we all have a critical role. Um, DD councils are the coolest. We get the most money, so we get to do the cool work. So our focuses are really on empowering advocates, which is something we all do. We like to work with and partners like families, direct support professionals, all sorts of professionals, policymakers, and we do tend to have a I think councils are very well positioned to understand system barriers because we are interfacing with people who use those systems all the time. And those can be members of your council, they can be people who are involved in your training projects because you're face to face with them listening and hearing about their experiences to see where things can possibly change. So you'll see, we kind of came out first, then university programs were established, then protection and advocacy was created. But in 2000, there is an emphasis in the DD Act that requires collaboration among the partners in your state. And some states have two university centers. There's only one DD council. There's only one. P&As, there are a couple of pull outs where a protection and advocacy, um, one, I think there is one that represents Native American populations, but basically one in every state or territory. Um, and I think there's 67 USEDs. So it really depends. Like Florida, it's usually the larger states that have a couple. Um, okay, next slide. Up and here's some resources. We do in the link, the orientation document, there is a big O, it's on start on page, I think 7 or 8, maybe page 8. It's called a DD Act Quick List. And executive directors have had this list for a few years. We always give it to our newer EDs. We thought it would be helpful to you. And the list is organized as a table. And you'll see that there's a topic on the left side. So if you specifically wanted to know about membership, you can see what page of the law it comes in on and the link to the law. I think it's pretty standard, but it's going to be a weird number, so don't freak out about it. But it is, we pulled out the most frequently asked about topics to include on the quick list. We've given you a couple of notes on the right-hand side so that you can see it. A lot of times, this is very helpful if you have council members that maybe you're staffing a committee for and they want to know something specific. And you can guide them right back to the DD Act. But it's kind of a framework to, help you know where to go to find out what the law says about certain things. And we do have a number of companion TA briefs um, and other resources to guide to give you expanded information. So you'll just, if you don't find something, reach out to Amy, reach out to me, and we are happy to either tell you, give you the link to where it is, or maybe it's something we don't have linked yet. And you're going to be the systems change agent in this process, and you're going to tell us what needs to be there, and we'll put it there. Okay. Um, let's go to the next one. Okay, the final rule. Um, the reason you need this, you do need to know about 45 CFR 1326. I know. Um, and 1325 has some definitions that maybe if you need to create something for grantees or create something for your council members, definitions are in 1325. Um, Now, this is interesting. So the law was passed in 2000. The final rule came about in 2015. It took 15 years to get the final rule on the law that began in 2000. But it's just additional guidance for implementing the program. The notable items are demonstration projects. And so, as you all are starting to create your next 5 year plan, and you've got council members that want to do really cool things, check out some information on demonstration. The reason I'm saying this is councils do not provide direct services to people with developmental disabilities. However, if you are demonstrating a new and innovative approach to services, supports, or other assistance, you could get approval to do that under a demonstration project. So check out demonstration projects if that's something your council is interested in. And then there's all sorts of other stuff um, in there, additional guidance like how to review your designated state agency, what to do if the governor says, nah, I'm not moving you, things like that. But those are more uncommon than common, so you're not going to get it. But if you ever have that problem, let me know. Next slide. Okay, now let's talk about the oversight of the program, the history and progression. So in 1970, when we got this law, federal oversight actually began within the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. That agency was later renamed to the Department of Health and Human Services, so what is currently known as HHS. So we started out at HHS. In 1990, the Administration on Developmental Disabilities was formed. It was created as part of the Administration for Children and Families, so ACF, where apparently we might be positioned right back there, but within HHS. So 1990, it was where ADD was originally, it was formally created. Then in 2012, so we hung out there for a little bit. 2012, the Administration for Community Living was created. And so ADD, Administration for Developmental Disabilities, was reorganized into the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So we went from ADD to AIDD. And AIDD was placed within the Administration for Community Living, where you see ACL today. And then in 2016, HHS established the Administration on Disabilities within ACL. Then in 2019, AIDD was formally changed to become the Office of Intellectual and Developmental Disability Programs. So you hear us talk about OIDD. That is today where your federal oversight sits. It is within AOD, within ACL, which most likely will be within ACF. So totally an alphabet soup, but this is it. This is all the formal stuff today. They are federally, you have project officers. You either have Sarah Newell Perez or you have Jack Brandt. Both are super fantastic people, very helpful. And those are the people that you will see on a lot of our calls. When we have larger meetings, you may see David Jones, who is the director of the administration. No, wait, he's the director. Oh, shoot. Now I'm gonna get all. He's the director of OIDD, and then you have AOD, and that's Jennifer Johnson, who's the acting commissioner of the Administration on Disabilities. So we do have leadership in place, and we do have staff in place. But right now, they have a lapse in funding, so we'll see them when there's not a lapse in funding. Okay, next slide. And we've provided you a bunch of relevant resources. We will send this PowerPoint out to everybody who came today. Um, if you have not visited the Minnesota DD Council Historical Archive, I tell you, Colleen Wick has done a magnificent job putting this archive together. They have video interviews, they have historical documents, but that interview with Alan Bergman on really kind of the people side of how the DD Act came about is really cool. So, in your spare time, I know you have none, but in your spare time, should you find any, check them out. We have fact sheets here. Anything that's in green is really a federal resource. And then one thing we wanted to give you just a helpful hint on is something we created was the DD Act state plan implementation activities. And it's done on an outcome focus. So if you've got council members that say, we want X to happen, you can look at that resource and you can say, okay, let me find X. And then we'll tell you where the DD Act supports your council to do that work. And so it's kind of we actually called it the DD Act activities and strategies flipped. We start off with, what do you want to do? And then here's where you can find the support to do it. Now, say you don't have anything. You don't have it, like the stuff you want to do isn't on that particular resource. Don't think you can't do it. Um, there's usually always a way. So don't get discouraged. Reach out, and we will help you find where we can where you can reference it so that your council knows you're on the straight and narrow. Okay, next slide. All right, Amy, let me stop here. Yes, Sierra, we will absolutely share this. We also have already put the orientation resource document on the website. It is like 20 pages long, but it has way more information than what we were going to highlight today. And we didn't want to junk your brains up too much. So all of that will come. Do any of you have any questions about history? I know history can't be fun, But it does give you a good sense of where we started, where we've been, and how we've progressed. Okay, Amy, I'll let you have it.
Okay. If history wasn't your thing, maybe federal reporting is where you find joy. Um, Hopefully, because we as DD councils tend to do what feels like a lot of it. You have two major forms of federal reporting that you do. So we'll talk about both of them, state plans and program performance reports. This is really just to give you a really broad overview of what they are, and not really get into the details. If you need detail information at the end, I'll tell you where you can find some of that stuff. Um, and Cheryl and I do webinars every time we come into a new federal reporting season, is what we call it. When we come into a federal reporting season, we do a webinar about that piece of federal reporting. So sometimes, especially as a new staff member, it's sometimes difficult to sort of figure out how all of the pieces of federal reporting really fit together. But it's important to know it really all starts with the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is really what everything else gets based off of. So the 5-year plan, the DD Act has some information about your 5-year plan. It requires that there are some specific components to it that must be completed. It says that DD council members should be engaged in all phases of the plan development. And then it also emphasizes 5-year goals be developed through data-driven strategic planning for advocacy, capacity building, and systemic change related to the areas of emphasis. So we talked about areas of emphasis already. Because most councils are sort of in the midst of developing the next 5-year plan, you may have been exposed already to some of the data-driven strategic planning that's happening. Or if you haven't, you will be soon. But councils gather together a lot of data about what's happening in your state and where the unmet or undermet needs are for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and families within your state or territory. And using that information, that is how council members should help arrive at whatever goals and objectives end up in your 5-year state plan. In addition to developing the 5-year plan, councils have to submit annual updates of the plan and, if necessary, amendments to the plan. You do an amendment if you have a very significant change to a 5-year goal. And if you have to do an amendment, it requires a 45-day public comment period. Updates are smaller changes that to an objective that wouldn't require a 45-day public period. But you also have some required annual updates. So you always update your contact information for the council and your membership and your staff rosters. And you also do a projected budget for the fiscal year of the update. Okay. Then the program performance report, or the PPR. The PPR is the annual report that identifies and reports on the progress that your council has made through advocacy, capacity building, and systemic change activities. It really covers your previous year's federal fiscal activities, and it includes things like the extent you have achieved state plan goals and objectives, the information on strategies and projects and activities that the DD Council has engaged in during the year to help achieve the objectives that are in the state plan. You talk about any factors that might have slowed progress or blocked progress from happening, or any roadblocks that have occurred. You talk about needs that require amending the state plan. You always give an update on the mandated self-advocacy goal. And you also give consumer and customer satisfaction with DD Council supported or conducted activities. So these are federal performance measures that you report data on. So your council has been gathering that data throughout the year as these activities have been ongoing through that federal fiscal year. We have a lot of resources about these topics because it's such a major part of what councils do. Our website is itachelp.org. And on the homepage, if you go to this red circled federal reporting tab and kind of hover over it, it'll bring down an option, and you can either choose the 5-year plan and annual updates or program performance reports. So we just sort of have things separated out under those two areas, depending on which piece of federal reporting you want to learn more about. Now let's talk roles and responsibilities. The council has the council members have 3 duties in general. They have to provide direction for the program, and they really do that by developing the state plan and then working towards implementation of the plan. And they provide guidance to the director, so your executive director, about the direction of the council program. They also are responsible for providing oversight of the council program. So making sure that the council is moving in the direction that they have planned for, so that things are being implemented to move towards those goals. And then they're also responsible for making funding decisions. They have a list of responsibilities that the council as a whole. The council serves as an advocate for individuals with developmental disabilities. They conduct or support programs, projects, and activities that improve the quality of life of individuals with disabilities. They are responsible for developing a state plan, implementing the state plan, monitoring the progress of the state plan, and then also making changes as needed to adapt it. Council has to periodically review the designated state agency and report all activities to ACL, AOD, OIDD. And that is done through those annual updates that you're doing, the 5-year state plan, and then those annual work plan updates that you're doing every year. Council prepares, approves, and implements a budget using the amount provided to it. So that comes through the federal grant award that the council receives every year. Council is responsible for recruiting and hiring a director consistent with state and territory law. They have staff who assist the director to support the DD Council in carrying out their responsibilities. Council is responsible for annually evaluating the director. And then the last bullet on here, the one that's pretty lengthy, this speaks to the self-advocacy, the required self-advocacy activities. So establish or strengthen a program for the direct funding of a state self-advocacy organization that is led by individuals with developmental disabilities. Support opportunities for those leaders to provide leadership training to individuals with developmental disabilities who may become future leaders. And to support and expand the participation of individuals with developmental disabilities in cross-disability and culturally diverse leadership coalitions. So those are your required self-advocacy activities that appear every year. something you work on every year as a council.
Hey, Amy, before you
Yep.
go, can we
Mhm.
go back one?
Sure.
So I want to add something to the bullet, monitor progress of the state plan. Again, I really want you all to understand that looks very different for each council. So when we talk about council members monitoring progress of the state plan, we are not, there's nothing in the law that suggests that they are now going to take up the work of staff who perform evaluation and monitoring of grantee programs. So most of the time, in general, when the council members fulfill this responsibility, when they come to a council meeting and there might be a report that staff give that say, here's where we are, here's the activities our grantees have taken up, here's the outputs, the number of people who participated in our activities, here's a couple of little comments from people who attended, or here's where we are on a systems change effort, we're moving forward. So not trying to, please don't interpret this as your council members now do that level of monitoring. They are volunteers. They have hired capable, competent, qualified staff to carry out many of the functions of this, but they need to get a regular report. And it doesn't have to be every council meeting. You all determine that, but they do need something that says we are keeping our eye on the things we funded. Are those things getting us the results we thought they were going to get us? So just want to throw that out there.
Good
Thanks,
point.
Amy.
Okay, so finally we'll talk about council staff. The, the DD Act says that the council they shall hire a director and supervise that director and annually evaluate that director. And then it goes on to say that the director shall hire and maintain types of qualified staff to carry out the functions of the council. So, in other words, the council hires the director, they supervise, they evaluate the director, then the director hires the staff and supervises and evaluates council staff. You could say that the council the council membership as a whole only has one employee, and that's the director. And then the director has however many employees you have at your council. That would be all the rest of the staff. So every
And
council
it
staff
also,
different.
can you talk about the councils who may have like deputy directors who other staff who then supervise staff?
Yep. So a director can, again, they have the authority to structure the rest of staff in whatever way works best for the council. So that might mean that there's a deputy director, or it might mean a program director. And those people, or maybe a finance director, depending on what staff they feel is needed. And then those staff might have other staff under them that they supervise. So even though this slide sort of talks more about a supervisory relationship where it is the director and then all the rest of the staff, they're actually free to structure the staffing pattern however they see fit. So it might mean that really they directly supervise maybe an administrative director and a financial director, and then under those two are more staff, and those two are directly supervising the staff. So the wording of the slide and also of the DD Act kind of makes it seem like the executive director supervises everyone, but in reality, they're able to structure the staff in whatever way makes the most sense for the council.
Thanks.
Yep. Council member responsibilities to the staff. So council members approve a yearly budget, and within that yearly budget, there will be line items for salaries, wages, benefits, and other staff-related costs. Council members do not have supervisory responsibilities for any of the staff other than the executive director. Council members do not participate in the annual review of council staff. They only participate in the annual review of the executive director. DD Council staff follow standard procedures within your state or territory system. So if council staff have complaints or concerns, you follow the state personnel policies and procedures for lodging those complaints. Council members are advised, and anytime Cheryl and I talk to council members about this, when we're giving the roles and responsibilities of council members, we're always very clear. Council members, we always advise them to instruct staff to follow proper channels to address any issues, because council work is sometimes you get really friendly with your council members. We're all people. And council staff are often, you might have to staff a committee. And so you work really closely with this council member and you become friends, and that's great. But at the end of the day, if you have an issue with something that's happening within the council and council staff related, you always go to your direct supervisor, and that person is never a council member. So we always tell council members that in the event that a council staff comes to you with an issue, you always instruct them to follow proper procedures to address any issues that they have, which will mean going back to whatever your state personnel policies and procedures are for addressing that issue. And that's the end of our slides. We'd love to answer any questions that you might have. Feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions. While you're thinking of what you might want to ask, I'm going to put up a poll, and we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to answer the poll questions too.
And while you're thinking of questions and doing the poll, maybe, TA services are provided free of charge, regardless of affiliation with your national association. So if you need anything, you all want to do any request for technical assistance, it's not required that you can ask us questions all the time. If you want like a little bit more intensive technical assistance, just out of courtesy, just loop your executive director in to your request. Not that it's necessary, but we do like to double check with the director to make sure that we're not stepping on toes, and that your supervisors actually know what your workload is. So we don't want to get in the way of something, but we do want you all to have as much information as you need to be able to move forward. We do something called rapid response, which is you can email us a question and we're going to answer it just as fast as we see it. And Amy and I are both really pretty good with getting you an answer back, mainly because Amy and I have both been the director of a DD council, and we know if you're asking a question, you need some information to move forward. And so we're very, very acutely aware that if you need a piece of information, we don't want you waiting for days. So if you've ever experienced, You're not going to go on hold. Let's put it that way. We'll get you something back as quickly as we can. Again, if you don't find a resource that you really were looking for, don't struggle too long. Just hit one of our emails and we will tell you where it is. We'll provide the link. We'll just answer. And if you don't like email, and I'll confess, I'm not a texter. So if you text me a question, it's going to be days before you get something back. But you can also call us. Although we do have NACDD numbers associated with each of us, our direct line is always on an email. It's everywhere, and it'll be on the slide deck that we're sending you. Just call us. We're here. This is what we do. We want you to feel that you have the necessary information to move forward. And we're not trying to replace your supervisor, your director, but you know, um, we do want you to have what you need. Any questions? You don't have to put it in the chat. You can just shout out. Okay. Well, we will free you for the rest of your day then. And we are super glad that you are part of the DD Council Network. We hope that you have joined our listserv or have joined the TA News Brief and the FAQ subscription list so that you can get our publications each month. And then you'll know what's happening. Check out our calendar on the itachhelp.org website. And we are so glad that you've spent some time with us today. And when you're ready, you can sign off.